My phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, the vibration humming against the granite like an angry bee. I was chopping vegetables for a stir-fry, the kind of mindless Tuesday evening ritual that usually brought me peace. But the moment I glanced at the screen and saw my sister's name, Claire, something cold slithered into my chest. Claire never texted just to say hello. Claire texted when she wanted something. I wiped my hands on a towel and picked up the phone. The message was short, brutal in its simplicity, and so wildly entitled that for a full 10 seconds I just stared at it, waiting for the punchline. There wasn't one. I'm quitting my job. You'll take care of us while I figure things out. No hello. No how are you. No please. Just a declaration, as if she were announcing the weather or a new law she'd just passed in the kingdom of Claire. I read it again. Then a third time. My stir-fry forgotten. The onions already browning and starting to burn in the pan, I leaned against the counter and felt my heartbeat shift from steady to that hard, pulsing rhythm that comes with shock. Who did she think she was? More importantly, who did she think I was? Let me back up a little, because none of this happened in a vacuum. I'm the younger sister, which in our family has always meant I'm the one who cleans up messes. Claire is 34, 2 years older than me, and she's spent her entire adult life making choices that someone else had to fix. She got married at 19 to a guy named Derek who sold used cars and had the emotional intelligence of a lawn chair. They had 2 kids back to back, Mason, now 12, and Lily, 9. Derek walked out when Lily was 2, citing irreconcilable differences, which really meant he'd found a younger woman at a dealership conference in Orlando. Claire was devastated, and I was there. I was always there. I helped her with the rent for 6 months. I bought groceries. I took the kids for weekends so she could breathe. I put my own life on hold, canceling plans, skipping vacations, because family helps family. That was the mantra my mother drilled into us from the time we could talk. Family helps family. Family comes first. Family is everything. But somewhere along the way, I started to notice a pattern. Claire never helped me. Not once. When I needed someone to watch my cat while I had emergency surgery for appendicitis, Claire said she was too overwhelmed. When I asked her to help me move apartments, she showed up an hour late, complained the whole time, and left early because Lily had a sniffle. When I got passed over for a promotion at work and called her crying, she listened for about 30 seconds before interrupting to tell me about how expensive Mason's dental work was going to be. I loved her. I did. She was my sister, and those kids were my niece and nephew, and I would have done almost anything for them. But almost is a key word, because what Claire was asking for now wasn't help. It was surrender. She wasn't asking me to lend a hand while she got back on her feet. She was telling me to take over entirely, to become the provider for her and her children while she figured things out. Figured what out? She'd been figuring things out for 15 years. The figuring never ended. The asking never ended. And I was tired. I set the phone down on the counter, face up, the blue light of the message still glowing. The onions in the pan had gone past brown to black, a thin thread of smoke curling up toward the ceiling. I turned off the burner and poured the ruined vegetables into the trash, then stood there with my hands on the edge of the sink, breathing. The decision came to me not like a lightning bolt, but like a slow tide, rising from somewhere deep in my gut. It was the kind of clarity that only comes after years of small betrayals, tiny cuts that you don't notice until one day you realize you're bleeding out. I wasn't going to do it. I wasn't going to quit my own job, which I loved, by the way, a graphic design position at a small but growing firm, to bankroll my sister's latest crisis. I wasn't going to put my life on hold again, so she could take another yoga teacher training or start another Etsy shop that would fizzle out in 3 months. I wasn't going to be her safety net anymore. I picked up the phone and typed my response. My thumbs felt heavy, each letter a small act of rebellion. That's not on me. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Then I turned off the kitchen light, walked to my bedroom, and opened my laptop. Because here's the thing I haven't told you yet. 3 weeks earlier, I'd received a job offer. A real one. A design agency in Dublin, Ireland, had reached out to me after seeing my portfolio online. They were looking for a senior creative lead, 6-month contract with possibility of extension, relocation assistance, the whole package. I'd applied on a whim, not thinking I'd actually get it. But I did. And I'd been sitting on the contract for 10 days waffling because leaving meant leaving my family, and family helps family, and what if Claire needed me? Well, now I knew exactly what Claire needed. And I knew exactly what I needed to do. The contract was still open in my browser, a digital document with a signature line waiting for my name. I read through it one more time, though I'd already memorized every clause. Start date, this coming Monday. That was 6 days away. 6 days to pack up my apartment, say my goodbyes, and get on a plane to a country I'd never visited. 6 days to start a new life. My hand didn't shake as I typed my name. Eleanor Grace Voss. I signed it, clicked submit, and watched the confirmation email pop into my inbox. Done. I was going to Dublin. I was leaving. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Claire. It was my mother. Eleanor Grace, what is wrong with you? Your sister is falling apart, and you tell her that's not on me? She needs you. Those children need you. I did not raise you to be this selfish. Call her right now and apologize. Then figure out how you're going to help. Family comes first. I expect a call by morning. I read my mother's message 3 times, each word a tiny dagger. Selfish. That word. It had been used against me so many times over the years, always whenever I tried to set a boundary, whenever I dared to put my own needs ahead of Claire's manufactured emergencies. Selfish was my mother's favorite weapon, honed sharp and kept close to her heart. And for most of my life, it worked. I'd apologize, I'd cave, I'd open my wallet and my calendar and my heart, and the cycle would begin again. But not this time. Something had broken in me, or maybe something had finally healed. Either way, I looked at my mother's message and felt not guilt but exhaustion. Bone-deep, soul-crushing exhaustion. I had given and given and given, and all they had ever done was take. Claire took my money, my time, my energy, my peace. My mother took my self-worth, my autonomy, my right to say no. And I had let them. I had been complicit in my own erasure. No more. I didn't respond to my mother. Instead, I turned off my phone, crawled into bed, and stared at the ceiling until the streetlights outside flickered off and the first gray light of dawn seeped through my curtains. I thought about Dublin. I thought about the cobblestone streets I'd seen in photos, the green hills, the river Liffey. I thought about starting over in a place where nobody knew me, where nobody had expectations, where I could be someone other than the fixer, the helper, the one who always said yes. I fell asleep sometime after 5, and when I woke up at 8, my phone was a war zone. 17 text messages from Claire. 12 from my mother. 3 from my Aunt Linda, who had clearly been recruited as reinforcements. I scrolled through them with a kind of detached curiosity, like a scientist observing a particularly aggressive species of bacteria. Claire's messages started with anger. How dare you? You've always been jealous of me. You're going to let your own niece and nephew suffer? Then moved to guilt. Mom says you're better than this. Dad would be so disappointed. I thought I could count on you, and finally landed on something that looked almost like vulnerability, though I'd learned to be skeptical of Claire's vulnerability. Please. I don't know what to do. I'm scared. The kids are scared. Just talk to me. My mother's messages were more consistent, a steady stream of shame and manipulation, each one designed to poke at the wounds she'd spent a lifetime creating. After everything I've sacrificed for you, you were always the difficult one. I pray for your soul every night. Your sister is crying herself to sleep because of you. I hope you're proud of yourself. Aunt Linda's single message was short and brutal. Your mother is heartbroken. Shame on you. I set the phone face down on my nightstand and went to take a shower. The water was hot, almost scalding, and I stood under the spray until my skin turned pink and my thoughts quieted. I wasn't going to respond to any of them. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I had 6 days until my flight, and I needed to use every single one of them to pack, to plan, to protect myself from the emotional warfare that was undoubtedly coming. But I also knew I couldn't just disappear. As much as I resented my family's behavior, as much as I needed to set boundaries, I wasn't cruel. Claire's children, Mason and Lily, were innocent in all of this. They didn't ask to be born into a family where their mother made terrible decisions and their aunt was expected to clean up the mess. They didn't deserve to be collateral damage in the war I was about to wage. So I made a plan. I would transfer a set amount of money into an account I'd set up for the kids years ago, money I'd saved from freelance work, money that was meant for their future. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to cover a few months of groceries or a couple of mortgage payments. I would send Claire a single message, calm and clear, explaining that I was moving abroad for work and would not be available to support her financially or emotionally. I would tell her that I loved her and the kids, but that I had to prioritize my own life for once. I would not apologize. I would not justify. I would state my truth and then I would walk away. That was the plan anyway. But plans have a way of unraveling when they come into contact with family. I got out of the shower, dried off, and dressed in my favorite jeans and a soft gray sweater. Comfort clothes. Armor. Then I picked up my phone and typed a message to Claire. I rewrote it 6 times before I settled on something that felt honest without being cruel. Claire, I love you, but I cannot be your financial support. I have my own life and my own responsibilities. I've accepted a job in Dublin and I'm leaving on Monday. I will always love Mason and Lily, and I've put some money into their savings account to help with expenses for a few months. But I need you to figure out your own path forward. I can't do it for you anymore. Please respect my decision. I hit send before I could talk myself out of it. Then I did the same for my mother, though my message to her was shorter and harder. Mom, I've accepted a job in Dublin. I leave Monday. I love you, but I will not be manipulated into taking care of Claire's family. I need you to respect my boundaries. I'll call you when I'm settled. I didn't wait for responses. I turned my phone to silent, plugged it into the charger, and left it in the bedroom while I went to the kitchen to make breakfast. Eggs, toast, coffee. Simple. Normal. A small act of self-care in the middle of a storm. The storm, however, was just getting started. By the time I finished eating, my phone had lit up again. I'd expected anger, but I hadn't expected the sheer volume of it. Claire had sent a voice message that I refused to listen to, but the transcription popped up on my screen. You're abandoning us. You're just like Dad. He left, and now you're leaving. I hope Dublin makes you happy because you've destroyed this family. My mother had called 4 times and left 2 voicemails. I didn't listen to those either. Instead, I started packing. I pulled out my largest suitcase, the one with the wheels that squeaked if you turned too sharply, and began sorting through my closet. Clothes for work. Clothes for weekends. A single fancy dress for some hypothetical event I probably wouldn't attend. I packed methodically, almost meditatively, trying to focus on the physical act of folding and stacking rather than the emotional wreckage happening on my phone. But the wreckage found me anyway. At 11 in the morning, someone knocked on my apartment door. Not a light, tentative knock, but a hard, insistent pounding that rattled the frame. I knew without looking who it was. Claire's knock had always been aggressive, as if the door had personally offended her. I considered not answering. I really did. But I also knew that Claire would just keep pounding, and my neighbors would complain, and eventually the landlord would get involved, and the whole thing would spin into an even bigger disaster. So I took a deep breath, walked to the door, and opened it. She looked terrible. That was my first thought, and it was true. Claire had always been beautiful in a sharp, angular way, high cheekbones, dark hair, eyes the color of strong tea. But today she looked haggard. Her hair was greasy and pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her eyes were red and swollen, circled with the kind of dark smudges that come from crying and not sleeping. She was wearing sweatpants and an old t-shirt that might have been Derek's, and she smelled like stale coffee and desperation. Behind her stood my mother. Margaret Voss was 62, a retired nurse with a spine of steel and a mouth that could flay flesh from bone. She was dressed in her usual uniform, pressed slacks, a button-down blouse, sensible shoes, and her expression was one of cold, calculated fury. This was not a social visit. This was an intervention. Eleanor, my mother said, pushing past Claire and stepping into my apartment without waiting for an invitation. We need to talk. I stepped back, not because I was intimidated, though I was a little, but because I needed space. My apartment was small, a 1-bedroom with a galley kitchen and a living room that doubled as my home office. With my mother and sister both standing in the middle of it, the walls suddenly felt much closer. I already said what I needed to say, I replied, keeping my voice even. I'm moving to Dublin. I start work Monday. The decision is made. Claire made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. You can't just leave. You can't just, we're your family. Mason asked me this morning if Aunt Ellie was going to come over this weekend. What am I supposed to tell him? Tell him the truth, I said. Tell him I'm moving for work. Tell him I love him. Tell him I'll video call when I can. But don't tell him that I'm abandoning him, because that's not what this is. That's exactly what this is. Claire's voice cracked, and tears spilled down her cheeks. She wiped them away angrily, as if the tears themselves were a betrayal. You're running away. You've always been the selfish one, Eleanor. Always. Remember when I needed you to watch Lily so I could go to that job interview? You said you had a deadline. A deadline. Like your stupid art was more important than me getting a job. I did watch Lily, I said, my jaw tightening. I pushed my deadline back by 2 days and worked through the night to catch up. And you didn't even get the job because you showed up late and hadn't prepared. But somehow that was my fault too. Girls. My mother's voice cut through the argument like a scalpel. This isn't productive. Eleanor, sit down. She pointed to the couch, and despite every rebellious instinct in my body, I sat. Years of conditioning are hard to break. My mother sat across from me in the armchair, arranging her posture so that she looked like a judge about to hand down a sentence. Claire remained standing, arms crossed, face blotchy with tears and anger. We're going to solve this, my mother said, like a family. Eleanor, Claire has been struggling. You know that. Derek left her with nothing. She's been raising 2 children on her own, working a job that barely covers the bills, and she's exhausted. She needs a break. She needs time to figure out what she wants to do with her life. And as her sister, it's your responsibility to help her. My responsibility, I repeated slowly. Not hers. Mine. You're not listening, my mother said, her voice taking on that clipped, impatient tone I'd heard my whole life. Claire isn't asking for a handout. She's asking for a hand up. She wants to quit her job so she can focus on finding something better. In the meantime, she needs someone to cover her expenses. You're the only one who can do that. You have a good job, no children, no real obligations. It's temporary. A few months, maybe. And then Claire will be back on her feet and everyone can move on. A few months. I'd heard that before. When Derek left, it was supposed to be a few months of help. When Claire decided to go back to school for a real estate license, which she never used, it was supposed to be a few months of covering her tuition. When her car broke down and she needed a new transmission, it was supposed to be a few months until she paid me back. I'd never seen a dime of that money. I'd never even been thanked properly. It's never just a few months, I said quietly. It's been 15 years, Mom. 15 years of me bailing Claire out. 15 years of me putting my life on hold because she made another bad decision. I'm tired. I'm so tired I can barely breathe. And I'm done. Claire's face crumpled. You're done? You're done with me? With the kids? With your own family? I'm done being the one who always fixes everything, I said, standing up. My legs were shaking, but my voice stayed steady. I love you, Claire. I love Mason and Lily. But I can't keep setting myself on fire to keep you warm. I have dreams. I have goals. I want to travel. I want to build a career that matters to me. I want to find a partner and maybe have my own kids someday. And none of that is possible if I'm constantly bailing you out of whatever crisis you've created. Created? Claire's voice rose to a shriek. I didn't create Derek leaving. I didn't create the economy. I didn't create any of this. Bad things happen to me, Eleanor. They just happen. And you're supposed to be there for me when they do. That's what sisters do. No, I said. That's what doormats do. Sisters support each other, but they also hold each other accountable. When have you ever held yourself accountable? When have you ever said, I made a mistake and I'm going to fix it? Never. Because you don't have to. You have Mom to make excuses for you and me to pay your bills. My mother stood up so fast the armchair rocked backward. How dare you? How dare you speak to your sister that way? I raised you better than this, Eleanor Grace. I gave up everything for you and Claire after your father left. Everything. I worked double shifts. I went without new clothes. I put food on the table while you two never wanted for anything. And this is how you repay me? By abandoning your own flesh and blood. The mention of my father was a low blow, and she knew it. He'd left when I was 10 and Claire was 12, walked out one night and never came back. No explanation, no goodbye, just an empty closet and a note on the kitchen table that said, I can't do this anymore. My mother had never forgiven him, and she'd made sure we never forgot it. Every sacrifice she made, every hardship she endured, was thrown back in our faces as proof of her love and our obligation. I'm not abandoning anyone, I said, though my voice wavered. I'm choosing myself for once. That's not the same thing. Claire stepped forward, her face inches from mine. I could see the tiny broken capillaries in her eyes, the faint lines around her mouth that hadn't been there a year ago. If you get on that plane, don't bother coming back. Don't bother calling. Don't bother sending money for the kids. You'll be dead to us. Dead. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and absolute. My mother didn't contradict her. She just stood there with her arms crossed, watching me, waiting to see if I would crumble. For a long moment, I almost did. The weight of their expectations, the years of conditioning, the deep primal fear of being cast out from my family, it pressed down on me like a physical force. I could feel the edges of my resolve starting to fray. I could imagine myself apologizing, backing down, canceling my flight, withdrawing my acceptance of that job offer. I could imagine myself staying, and I could imagine what staying would look like: more years of the same, more money down the drain, more weekends spent watching the kids while Claire took a break, more holidays where my accomplishments were dismissed and my needs were ignored. And then I thought about Dublin. I thought about the email from my new boss, a woman named Siobhan with a warm smile and a kind voice, who had said, "We're so excited to have you on the team. This could be the start of something beautiful." I thought about the apartment I'd already rented through a relocation service, a tiny studio in a neighborhood called the Liberties, all exposed brick and creaky floors. I thought about the life I'd been too afraid to live, and I realized that the only thing standing between me and that life was the word selfish. So let them call me selfish. Let them call me anything they wanted. I was done. "Okay," I said quietly, stepping back from Claire. "Then I guess I'm dead to you. Have a nice life." I walked to the front door and held it open. My mother stared at me with an expression I couldn't read. Fury, yes, but also something else. Disappointment? Fear? It didn't matter. Claire stormed past me without a word, her shoulder deliberately bumping mine as she went. My mother paused at the threshold, her hand on the doorframe. "You'll regret this," she said. "One day, when you're old and alone, you'll look back and realize what you threw away. And it will be too late." "Maybe," I said. "But at least I won't be broke." The door closed between us. I locked it, then slid down the wall until I was sitting on the floor, my back against the cheap wood, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The silence of my apartment felt enormous, almost deafening after the noise of their presence. I sat there for a long time, not crying, not thinking, just breathing. Eventually, I got up. I had a flight to catch in 6 days, and I had packing to do. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. I gave notice to my landlord, who was surprisingly understanding. I arranged for a moving company to store my furniture. Most of it wasn't worth shipping across the Atlantic, but there were a few pieces I couldn't bear to part with, including the oak rocking chair my grandmother had left me. I put the rest of my belongings into boxes: books, kitchenware, framed photos, the small collection of houseplants that had somehow survived my inconsistent care. I canceled my utilities, forwarded my mail, and spent an entire afternoon on the phone with my bank and my insurance company, making sure everything was in order. Through it all, my phone continued to buzz. Claire sent a few more angry messages, then nothing. My mother called twice a day, every day, and I let every call go to voicemail. She didn't leave messages after the first 2. Aunt Linda sent a long, rambling email about forgiveness and family bonds, which I deleted without reading. A few cousins reached out, clearly acting as intermediaries, asking if I was okay and if there was anything they could do. I gave vague, polite responses and changed the subject. The hardest part was Mason and Lily. I'd been a constant presence in their lives since they were born, babysitting, attending school plays, taking them for ice cream on summer afternoons. They called me Aunt Ellie, and I loved them with a fierceness that surprised me, given how much I resented their mother. On Thursday night, 3 days before my flight, I sent Claire a message asking if I could come see them one last time. She didn't respond. I called her. She didn't pick up. I called my mother, asking her to intervene. My mother said, "You made your choice. Live with it." And hung up. That was when the real pain started. Not the anger, not the guilt, but the grief. I was losing my niece and nephew, and there was nothing I could do about it. I couldn't force Claire to let me see them. I couldn't explain to a 12-year-old and a 9-year-old why their aunt was disappearing to another country. All I could do was write them letters, long, handwritten letters that I sealed in envelopes and left on Claire's doorstep with a box of their favorite candies. I told them I loved them. I told them I would always be their aunt, no matter how far away I was. I gave them my email address and my new phone number and promised to answer whenever they reached out. Then I went home, packed the last of my things, and tried not to think about whether those letters would ever reach them. Saturday night, the night before my flight, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my empty apartment, the furniture gone, the walls bare, only a suitcase and a carry-on bag in the corner, and stared at the ceiling. The streetlight outside cast faint shadows that danced across the plaster. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. A car drove by, its headlights sweeping across the room like a lighthouse beam. I thought about all the things I was leaving behind. Not just my family, but my city, my friends, my favorite coffee shop, the park where I'd walked 1,000 times, the library where I'd spent countless rainy afternoons. I thought about the life I'd built here, piece by piece, and how I was dismantling it in a matter of days. I thought about whether I was making the biggest mistake of my life. And then I thought about Claire's text again. I'm quitting my job. You'll take care of us while I figure things out. Not a request. Not a conversation. A command. As if my life, my time, my money belonged to her by default. As if I had no say in the matter. As if I was nothing more than an extension of her needs. That thought, more than any other, solidified my resolve. I wasn't running away. I was running toward something. Toward a life where my worth wasn't measured by how much I sacrificed for others. Toward a future where my dreams mattered as much as anyone else's. Toward a version of myself that I hadn't met yet, but that I was desperate to become. I fell asleep sometime after 2 and woke up before my alarm at 6. The morning air was cold and sharp, the kind of autumn chill that makes you want to curl up under a blanket with a cup of tea. But I didn't have time for blankets or tea. I had a plane to catch. I dressed in layers, jeans, a long-sleeved shirt, a hoodie, my heaviest coat. The weather in Dublin was supposed to be rainy and cool, nothing like the crisp sunshine of my Midwestern hometown. I double-checked my passport, my visa, my printed itinerary. I called a car service to take me to the airport. Then I stood in the middle of my empty apartment, keys in hand, and said goodbye. Not to the apartment, exactly. To the person I'd been. The people pleaser. The doormat. The girl who said yes when she meant no, who apologized when she'd done nothing wrong, who believed that love meant sacrificing herself on the altar of someone else's happiness. That girl was staying behind. And I was walking out the door. The drive to the airport took 45 minutes. I watched the city scroll past my window, the strip malls, the suburban neighborhoods, the downtown skyscrapers gleaming in the morning light. I'd lived here my whole life. Every street held a memory, every intersection a story. But the memories were bittersweet now, tangled up with years of frustration and resentment. I was ready for new memories. I was ready for blank pages. At the airport, I checked my suitcase, sailed through security, and found my gate with an hour to spare. I bought an overpriced sandwich and a bottle of water, then settled into a plastic chair and watched the other travelers. Families heading to Disney World. Business people in suits, laptops open, typing furiously. A young couple holding hands, clearly going somewhere romantic. I wondered if anyone else at this gate was running away from something. I wondered if anyone else felt as terrified and exhilarated as I did. My phone buzzed. I looked down, expecting a final message from my mother or Claire, but it was my friend Rachel, the only person I'd told about my plans. Rachel and I had met in college and stayed close ever since. She was the kind of friend who showed up with soup when you were sick and told you the truth even when it hurt. You've got this. Call me when you land. I'm so proud of you. I smiled, blinked back tears, and typed back, thank you. I love you. Then I turned my phone to airplane mode, slipped it into my pocket, and waited for boarding. The flight was long. 7 hours and 43 minutes, according to the screen on the back of the seat in front of me. I had a window seat, and I spent the first hour watching the clouds, the second hour watching a movie I barely remembered, and the remaining hours trying to sleep. I dozed fitfully, dreaming of my mother's face, of Claire's voice, of Mason and Lily's small hands waving goodbye. When the plane began its descent, I pressed my forehead against the cold glass and watched Ireland appear below me. Green. So much green. Fields and hills and patches of forest, all of it carpeted in that vibrant emerald color that I'd only ever seen in photographs. The sky was gray and heavy with clouds, but the light that filtered through them was soft and golden, like the world was wrapped in a silk scarf. We landed at Dublin Airport just after 9 in the morning local time. My body thought it was 4 in the morning, and I was exhausted and wired at the same time. I collected my suitcase from baggage claim, made my way through customs, which was surprisingly quick, and stepped outside to find a man holding a sign with my name on it. He was from the relocation service, a cheerful guy named Declan with a red beard and a thick accent that I could only understand about half of. He drove me to my new apartment in a battered blue van, pointing out landmarks along the way, the River Liffey, the Spire, Trinity College, St. Patrick's Cathedral. The apartment was exactly as advertised, small, charming, and full of character. The building was old, probably 18th century, with creaking stairs and windows that didn't quite close all the way. But the studio itself had been recently renovated, with a new kitchenette, a modern bathroom, and a bed that looked surprisingly comfortable. The exposed brick wall was painted white, and the floor was wide plank wood that sloped slightly toward the window. I dropped my suitcase in the middle of the room, turned in a slow circle, and felt something unlock in my chest. This was mine. This tiny, imperfect, beautiful space was mine. No one here knew me. No one here had expectations. No one here could text me at 2 in the morning demanding rent money or childcare. I was alone, but for the first time in a long time, alone felt like freedom instead of loneliness. I spent the rest of the day unpacking and settling in. I didn't have much, just a suitcase full of clothes and a carry-on bag with my laptop and a few personal items, but I arranged everything carefully, trying to create a sense of home. I hung a small photo of my grandmother on the wall above the bed. I set my laptop on the small desk by the window. I put my toiletries in the bathroom cabinet and my shoes in a neat row by the door. By evening, I was hungry and jet-lagged and slightly overwhelmed. I found a small grocery store around the corner and bought bread, cheese, apples, and a bottle of wine. Back in my apartment, I sat on the floor, I didn't have a table yet, and ate my makeshift dinner while looking out the window at the Dublin skyline. The sun was setting, painting the clouds in shades of pink and orange, and a light rain had started to fall, tapping softly against the glass. I thought about calling Rachel. I thought about emailing my new boss to confirm my start date. I thought about checking social media to see if my family had posted anything about me. But I didn't do any of those things. Instead, I finished my wine, brushed my teeth, and crawled into bed. The sheets were white and smelled like lavender. The pillow was soft. The rain was a lullaby. For the first time in years, I slept without dreaming. Monday morning came too fast. My alarm went off at 7, and I groaned, rolled over, and seriously considered calling in sick to a job I hadn't even started yet. But I forced myself out of bed, took a quick shower, and dressed in the outfit I'd carefully selected the night before: a black blazer, a cream-colored blouse, tailored trousers, and low heels. Professional. Polished. The uniform of someone who had her life together. The design agency was in a converted warehouse in the Temple Bar District, a neighborhood known for its cobblestone streets and vibrant art scene. I walked there from my apartment, following the GPS on my phone, trying to ignore the nervous flutter in my stomach. The streets were busy with morning commuters and tourists, the air thick with a smell of coffee and damp stone. The agency's name was Silverhand Creative, and their office was exactly the kind of hip, open-concept space I dreamed about working in. Exposed ductwork, colorful murals on the walls, a kitchen stocked with fancy coffee and artisanal snacks. Siobhan, the managing director, met me at the door with a warm hug that surprised me but didn't feel unwelcome. "Welcome, welcome," she said, her Irish accent rolling over the words like music. "We're so thrilled to have you. Come on, let me introduce you to the team." The team was small, about 15 people, and they were all incredibly welcoming. There was Tom, the senior copywriter, who made a joke about American coffee being dishwater. There was Priya, the project manager, who showed me how to use the booking system for the meeting rooms. There was an intern named Cormac who was so young he looked like he should still be in high school. They all smiled at me, asked me where I was from, told me they hoped I'd love Dublin. My desk was in the corner, near a window that overlooked a narrow street full of colorful doors. Someone had left a potted plant on it, a small succulent with a card that said, "Welcome to the team." I sat down, opened my laptop, and felt something shift inside me. Not happiness, exactly. Not yet. But possibility. A sense that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The first week was a blur of onboarding meetings, software tutorials, and getting to know you lunches. I learned the names of all my coworkers, memorized the office layout, and started digging into my first project, a branding campaign for a local craft brewery. It was challenging and creative and exactly the kind of work I'd moved here to do. But the work wasn't the only thing on my mind. Every night, when I went back to my tiny apartment, I checked my phone. Not for messages from my family. I'd blocked my mother and Claire after the first few days, unable to handle the constant barrage of guilt and anger, but for any sign that Mason or Lily had tried to reach out. Nothing. The silence was deafening. I told myself it was for the best. I told myself that Claire was probably keeping them from contacting me, and that if they really wanted to talk to me, they would find a way. But the not knowing gnawed at me, a low-grade ache that I couldn't quite ignore. Rachel called me on Wednesday evening, her voice crackling over the international connection. "How is it? Are you okay? Have you met any cute Irish guys yet?" I laughed, the first real laugh I'd had in days. "It's good. Really good. The work is interesting, the people are nice, and the city is beautiful. I haven't met any cute Irish guys, but I've only been here a week." "Give it time," Rachel said. "And don't forget to actually leave your apartment sometimes. You're not there just to work. You're there to live." She was right, of course. So that weekend, I forced myself to explore. I walked along the River Liffey, crossed the Hoppenny Bridge, and browsed the stalls at the Temple Bar Food Market. I visited Dublin Castle, which was less a castle and more a collection of old buildings, but still impressive. I found a tiny bookshop on a side street and spent an hour flipping through Irish poetry and history books. I even went to a pub, just for one pint, just to say I'd done it, and listened to a traditional music session that made me feel like I'd stepped into a different century. As I walked home that night, the rain falling softly on my jacket, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from avoiding conflict, but the kind that comes from knowing you've made the right choice. I wasn't happy yet, there was too much unresolved grief for that, but I was content. And contentment, I was learning, was its own kind of happiness. The weeks turned into months. I fell into a rhythm. Work during the day, exploring on weekends, video calls with Rachel every few days. I made a few friends. Tom from work invited me to a pub quiz, and Priya took me to a yoga class that left me sore for a week. I started learning to cook Irish dishes, Colcannon, Boxty, Cottle. I discovered that I loved the rain, the way it made the city feel soft and intimate, like a secret I was sharing with no one. But the shadow of my family was always there, lurking at the edges of my thoughts. I hadn't heard from Claire or my mother since I blocked their numbers, but I'd kept my social media accounts active, and I checked them occasionally, bracing myself for whatever I might find. My mother had posted a few vague, passive-aggressive statuses about the importance of family and what happens when children forget where they came from. Claire hadn't posted anything at all, which worried me more than it should have. The hardest moments were when I thought about Mason and Lily. I pictured Mason's serious face, the way he cocked his head when he was thinking, the dimple that appeared when he smiled. I pictured Lily's wild curls and her gap-toothed grin, the way she used to climb into my lap and demand stories. I missed them with a physical ache, a hollow space in my chest that nothing else could fill. I sent them letters every month addressed to Claire's house because I didn't know where else to send them. I wrote about my life in Dublin, about the funny things my coworkers said, about the stray cat that had started hanging around my apartment building. I told them I loved them and that I was thinking about them. I never got a response, but I kept writing anyway. It was the only way I could stay connected to them, even if the connection was one-sided. 3 months into my contract, something happened that I hadn't expected. I got an email from my mother's sister, my Aunt Susan, not the one who'd sent the angry message, but the other one. Aunt Susan had always been the black sheep of the family, the one who'd moved to Oregon and married a potter and never came to Thanksgiving. We weren't close, but we exchanged Christmas cards and the occasional Facebook comment. Her email was short and to the point. Eleanor, I heard what happened. I'm sorry. Your mother and Claire are wrong. You did the right thing. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. I read that email 10 times, tears streaming down my face. It was the first validation I'd received from anyone in my family, the first acknowledgement that my choices might have been justified rather than selfish. I wrote back immediately, thanking her, telling her I'd love to talk sometime. We scheduled a call for the following weekend. When I told Rachel about it, she said, "See, you're not crazy. You were never crazy. They just wanted you to think you were." That conversation with Aunt Susan was the beginning of something. Not a reconciliation with my mother or Claire, that was still a long way off, if it ever happened at all, but a reconnection with a part of my family that I'd lost touch with. Aunt Susan told me things I hadn't known, that my mother had always favored Claire, even when we were kids. That my grandmother had worried about me, had seen how I was being used and hadn't known how to intervene. That there was a whole history of enmeshment and codependency in our family, stretching back generations. You broke the cycle, Aunt Susan said. That's not selfish. That's heroic. I didn't feel heroic. I felt tired and sad and lonely, even as I built a new life for myself in Dublin. But I also felt something else, a quiet, stubborn pride. I had done a hard thing. I had said no when every instinct told me to say yes. I had chosen myself, and I was still standing. 5 months into my contract, Siobhan called me into her office. I was nervous. I'd made a few minor mistakes on a project recently, and I was worried I was about to be fired. But Siobhan was smiling, that warm, easy smile that made her look like she'd just won the lottery. "We'd like to extend your contract," she said. "Another 6 months, with a raise. And if you're interested, there's a possibility of a permanent position after that." I stared at her. "Are you serious?" "Deadly serious," she said. "You've done excellent work, Eleanor. The team loves you. The clients love you. We'd be fools to let you go." I accepted on the spot, barely containing my excitement. A permanent position in Dublin. A real life here. It was more than I dared to hope for. That night, I called Rachel to share the news. She screamed so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "This is amazing. This is everything you wanted. I'm so proud of you." "I'm proud of me too," I said, and I meant it. But even as I celebrated, part of me was still looking backward, still wondering about the family I'd left behind. I'd blocked their numbers, but I hadn't blocked their memories. They were woven into me, part of the fabric of who I was, and I couldn't simply cut them out without leaving ragged edges. I decided, that night, to unblock my mother's number. Just to see if she'd tried to reach me. Just to see if anything had changed. The damage had been done. My phone buzzed almost immediately, as if she'd been waiting for me to reappear. A text message, dated just a few hours earlier. "Your sister lost the house. The bank is foreclosing. She and the kids are living in a motel. I hope you're happy." I read the message once, then twice, then a third time. The words blurred together, swimming in front of my eyes. Lost the house. Foreclosing. Living in a motel. I felt the world tilt beneath me, the floor suddenly unsteady. This was what I had been afraid of. This was the nightmare scenario that had kept me up at night, the reason I'd said yes so many times before. I had said no, and now everything had fallen apart. Claire had lost her home. Mason and Lily were living in a motel. And it was my fault. Wasn't it? The guilt hit me like a wave, cold and suffocating. I sat on the edge of my bed, my phone clutched in my hands, trying to breathe. My mother's words echoed in my head. Selfish. Abandoning. You'll regret this. Maybe she was right. Maybe I had been selfish. Maybe I should have just helped, just this once, just for a few months. Maybe if I'd stayed, I could have prevented this. Maybe I could have paid the mortgage, kept the bank at bay, given Claire the time she needed to figure things out. But even as the guilt washed over me, another voice, quieter, steadier, spoke up from somewhere deep inside. That voice said, "You didn't cause this. Claire caused this. Claire quit her job. Claire didn't have a plan. Claire didn't save her money or look for other work or ask for help from anyone else. She just assumed you would fix everything, and when you didn't, she didn't try to fix it herself. She let it fall apart." The voice was right. I knew it was right. But knowing and feeling are two different things, and right now, all I could feel was the crushing weight of my sister's failure and the knowledge that two innocent children were suffering because of it. I called Aunt Susan. It was late in Dublin, but early in Oregon, and she picked up on the second ring. "Eleanor? What's wrong?" I told her about the text. I told her about the foreclosure, the motel, the flood of guilt and confusion I was drowning in. She listened without interrupting, and when I was finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Eleanor, listen to me," she said finally. "You are not responsible for your sister's choices. You are not responsible for her house. You are not responsible for her children. You have helped her more than anyone else in this family, and she has never once helped you. You set a boundary, and she crossed it. That's not on you. But the kids," I whispered. "Mason and Lily. They didn't do anything wrong. They don't deserve to live in a motel." "No, they don't," Aunt Susan agreed. "And if you want to help them, you can. But you don't have to help Claire. You can send money directly for the kids. You can buy them clothes, pay for their school supplies, put money in a college fund. You don't have to give Claire a single dollar. That's a boundary you can hold." The idea was a lifeline, and I grabbed it. How do I do that? How do I make sure the money goes to them and not to her? You set up a separate account. You pay for things directly, school fees, medical bills, a security deposit on a new apartment. You don't hand over cash. You be the gatekeeper. And if Claire doesn't like it, that's her problem. I spent the next hour on the phone with Aunt Susan, making a plan. Then I sent a message to my mother, calm, measured, devoid of the emotion that was churning inside me. "I'm sorry to hear about the house. I will help with the kids directly. Tell me what they need. But I will not give money to Claire." My mother's response came back within minutes. "Too little, too late. They don't need your pity money. They need you to come home and be a sister." I didn't respond. I couldn't. There was nothing I could say that would change her mind, nothing I could do that would satisfy her. She wanted me to come home, to fall back into my old role, to sacrifice myself on the altar of Claire's needs. And I wasn't going to do that. Not anymore. But I also wasn't going to abandon Mason and Lily. So I reached out to Claire's landlord. A quick internet search gave me the property management company's contact information and asked if there was any way to stop the foreclosure. There wasn't. The process was already too far along. But I did learn that Claire had stopped making payments 6 months ago, around the same time she'd quit her job. She hadn't just quit. She'd stopped paying her mortgage. She'd stopped paying her car loan. She'd stopped paying her credit card bills. She had simply stopped. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Claire hadn't lost her house because she was struggling. She'd lost her house because she had given up. She had decided, somewhere along the way, that she didn't have to try anymore, because someone else, me, would take care of everything. And when I didn't, she just let it all fall apart. I was angry. So angry I could barely see straight. But beneath the anger was something worse, disappointment. Not in Claire, I'd been disappointed in her for years. Disappointment in myself for not seeing this coming. For believing, somehow, that my sister would actually step up once I stepped back. For thinking that the threat of losing her home would motivate her to get a job, to make a plan, to do anything other than wait for someone else to save her. But she hadn't saved herself. And now Mason and Lily were paying the price. I couldn't let that stand. So I called the school district where Mason and Lily were enrolled and asked if there was a way to prepay their lunch accounts for the rest of the year. There was. I did it. I contacted their pediatrician's office and made sure their insurance was still active. It wasn't, so I paid for a new policy out of pocket. I found a local charity that helped families in transition and arranged for them to provide a care package for the kids, winter coats, shoes, school supplies. I did all of this without ever speaking to Claire. I didn't want to speak to Claire. I couldn't. Every time I thought about her entitled text message and her refusal to take responsibility for her own life, I felt a rage so hot it scared me. But I also felt something else. A strange, unexpected tenderness. Because despite everything, she was still my sister. And somewhere beneath the entitlement and the manipulation and the endless need, there was a person I had once loved without reservation. A person who had taught me to ride a bike, who had held my hand at our father's funeral, who had made me laugh until I cried on 1,000 ordinary afternoons. That person was still in there, I thought. Buried under layers of dysfunction and denial, but still alive. And maybe someday, she would find her way back. But not today. Today, I had a job to do, a life to build, a future to claim. And I was going to do it, with or without my family's blessing. The next few months were a balancing act. I threw myself into my work, producing some of the best designs of my career. I got to know Dublin better, exploring neighborhoods and making friends. I even started dating a quiet, kind man named Owen who worked as a librarian and had a gentle smile that made my heart skip. It wasn't serious, not yet, but it was nice. It was normal. It was a reminder that life could be good, even when other parts of it were falling apart. At the same time, I kept tabs on Claire and the kids through Aunt Susan. They were still in the motel, but Claire had finally gotten a job, a part-time position at a retail store, not enough to afford a new apartment, but something. She had also started seeing a therapist, which was more than I'd ever expected. Aunt Susan said she seemed different. Softer. Less defensive. I think losing the house was a wake-up call, Aunt Susan told me. She's finally realizing that she can't just wait for someone else to fix things. She has to do it herself. I wanted to believe that. I really did. But I'd been burned too many times to trust in Claire's transformation. So I kept my distance, sending money and support for the kids, but staying out of Claire's life. It was the only way I could protect myself. 9 months after I'd arrived in Dublin, I got a message that changed everything. It was from Mason. He had found my email address. I didn't know how, maybe through Aunt Susan, and he had written me a long, rambling email that made me cry for an hour. Dear Aunt Ellie, I miss you. Mom says you left because you don't care about us anymore, but I don't believe her. You always cared. You came to my soccer games and helped me with my math homework and made me laugh when I was sad. I don't know why you moved to Ireland, but I hope you're happy there. Lily and I are okay. We live in a motel, but it's not so bad. There's a pool, but it's closed for the winter. Mom is different now. She doesn't yell as much. She talks to a lady on the phone who helps her with her feelings. I think she misses you too, but she won't say it. I just wanted to say I love you. Please write back. Mason. I wrote back immediately. I told him I loved him too, that I thought about him every day, that leaving had been the hardest thing I'd ever done, but that I had to do it for my own sanity. I told him about Dublin, about the rain and the castles, and the stray cat that had adopted me. I told him that none of what happened was his fault, that he and Lily were innocent, that I would always be his aunt no matter how far away I was. And then I did something I hadn't planned. I booked a flight home. Not to stay, just for a week. Just to see Mason and Lily. Just to test the waters and see if there was any chance of rebuilding something with Claire. I didn't tell anyone I was coming except Aunt Susan. I didn't want to give my mother or Claire the chance to talk me out of it. I just packed a bag, took a red-eye flight, and landed in my hometown on a gray Tuesday morning, exhausted and terrified and full of hope. Aunt Susan picked me up at the airport. She looked older than I remembered, her hair more gray than brown, but her eyes were the same kind green that had always made me feel safe. She hugged me for a long time, her arms tight around my shoulders, and whispered, "I'm so proud of you." Then she drove me to the motel. It was exactly as depressing as I'd imagined. A 2-story building with faded yellow paint and a flickering neon sign that said vacancy. The parking lot was cracked and full of potholes. A few sad-looking shrubs huddled against the front office, their leaves brown and withered. I sat in Aunt Susan's car for a long time, staring at the building, trying to work up the courage to go inside. "I can come with you," Aunt Susan offered. "Or I can wait here. Whatever you need." "Wait here," I said. "If I need you, I'll call." I got out of the car and walked to the motel room Aunt Susan had told me about, number 17, on the ground floor, near the ice machine. The door was painted a garish shade of blue that clashed with everything. I knocked, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The door opened, and there was Claire. She looked different. Thinner, older, the shadows under her eyes deeper than I remembered. But there was something else too, something I couldn't quite name. A softness, maybe. A weariness that wasn't just exhaustion but resignation. She stared at me for a long moment, her mouth slightly open, and I saw a dozen emotions flicker across her face. Shock, disbelief, anger, fear, and finally, something that looked like relief. "Eleanor." Her voice cracked on my name. "Hi, Claire." She didn't say anything else. She just stepped aside, holding the door open, and I walked into the motel room. It was small and cramped, with 2 double beds, a tiny bathroom, and a kitchenette that consisted of a mini fridge, a microwave, and a coffee maker. Mason and Lily were sitting on one of the beds, watching cartoons on a tablet. When they saw me, their faces lit up like Christmas trees. "Aunt Ellie!" Lily shrieked, launching herself off the bed and into my arms. She was bigger than I remembered, her curls longer, her front teeth finally grown in. I held her tight, breathing in the smell of her hair, strawberry shampoo, and something sweeter, something that was just her. Mason was more reserved, hanging back by the bed, but his eyes were bright with unshed tears. I reached out my hand to him, and after a moment, he took it. "Hey, buddy," I said. "I missed you." "I missed you too," he whispered. And then he was crying, and I was crying, and Lily was crying, and we all stood there in that tiny motel room, holding each other, while Claire watched from the doorway with an expression I couldn't read. Eventually, the tears subsided. I sat on the edge of one of the beds, Lily on my lap, Mason pressed against my side. Claire sat on the other bed, her hands clasped in her lap, looking everywhere but at me. "Why are you here?" she asked finally. Her voice was flat, guarded. "Did Mom call you? Did Susan?" "No," I said. "Mason emailed me. He said you were different. I wanted to see for myself." Claire flinched, just slightly. "Mason shouldn't have done that." "I'm glad he did." A long silence stretched between us, filled only by the sound of the cartoon playing on the tablet. Mason reached over and turned it off, and the room fell quiet. "I lost the house," Claire said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I lost everything. The house, the car, my credit. I hit rock bottom. And I kept waiting for you to come back and save me, but you didn't. So I had to save myself." "And did you?" I asked. She shrugged, a small, helpless gesture. "I'm trying. I have a job. I see a therapist. I'm on medication for depression. It's not easy, but I'm trying." I didn't know what to say. This wasn't the sister I remembered. The sister I remembered would have been screaming at me by now, listing all the ways I'd failed her. This Claire was quiet, almost fragile, like a china doll that had been dropped and glued back together. "I'm sorry," she said suddenly, and the words hit me like a thunderbolt. "I'm sorry for everything. For the text. For expecting you to take care of me. For not listening when you said no. For blaming you when things fell apart. I was wrong. I've always been wrong. And I'm sorry." I stared at her, my mouth hanging open. In 34 years, I had never heard my sister apologize for anything. Not once. She had apologized for small things, for forgetting to return a book, for being late to a lunch date, but never for the big things. Never for the pattern of entitlement and manipulation that had defined our entire relationship. I don't know what to say, I admitted. You don't have to say anything, Claire replied. I just needed you to know. I'm not asking for money. I'm not asking for you to come back. I'm just sorry. The word hung in the air, delicate and fragile. I wanted to believe it. I wanted to believe that Claire had changed, that she was capable of taking responsibility, that our relationship could be something other than a one-way street of sacrifice and resentment. But I'd been burned too many times. Trust, once broken, isn't easily restored. I'm not ready to forgive you, I said quietly. I'm not sure I ever will be. But I'm glad you're trying. And I'm glad the kids are okay. Claire nodded, her eyes glistening. I understand. I do. Take all the time you need. I stayed in the motel room for another hour, playing with Mason and Lily, telling them stories about Dublin, showing them pictures on my phone. Lily asked if I'd seen any leprechauns. Mason asked if the food was weird. Claire mostly stayed quiet, but every once in a while, she would smile at something the kids said, and for a moment, she looked like the sister I remembered from before everything went wrong. When it was time to go, I hugged Mason and Lily tightly, promising to call and email and send postcards. Then I turned to Claire. You have my number, I said. If you ever want to talk, really talk, not just ask for money, you can call me. I will, she said. And I think she meant it. Aunt Susan drove me to my mother's house. I hadn't planned to go there, but Aunt Susan said, you came all this way. You might as well face her. Rip off the bandage. My mother's house was the same as it had always been, a modest ranch with a well-tended garden and a front porch swing that creaked in the wind. I had grown up in this house. I had run through these halls, eaten at this table, cried in this bedroom. But today, it felt like a stranger's home. My mother opened the door before I could knock. She must have seen me pull into the driveway. She looked older too, more lines around her eyes, more gray in her hair. But her expression was the same, a mixture of hardness and disappointment that I had known my whole life. Eleanor. Mom. We stood there for a long moment, neither of us willing to make the first move. Finally, my mother stepped aside, and I walked into the living room. Everything was exactly as I remembered it, the floral couch, the wooden bookshelf, the framed photos on the wall. Photos of Claire and me as children. Photos of Mason and Lily. No photos of me as an adult, I noticed. I had been erased. Sit down, my mother said. I sat on the couch. She sat in her armchair, the same one from that terrible day in my apartment, and folded her hands in her lap. I didn't expect you to come back, she said. Neither did I. Why did you? I considered lying, giving her the answer she wanted to hear. But I was done lying. I was done pretending. I came to see the kids. And I came to tell you that I'm not moving back. I have a life in Dublin now. A good life. I'm not going to give it up. My mother's jaw tightened. So this is goodbye then. It doesn't have to be. You could call me. You could visit. But you can't guilt me into coming home. That's not going to work anymore. I never guilt you, she said, her voice rising. I never did anything but love you and want what was best for this family. You guilt me every single day, I said, my voice steady. Every time you said family comes first, you meant Claire comes first and you come last. Every time you called me selfish for setting a boundary, you meant your needs don't matter. Every time you defended Claire's bad decisions, you taught her that she never had to take responsibility. I love you, Mom. But I can't keep living my life to make you happy. My mother's face crumpled. For a moment, she looked like a little girl, lost and afraid. I just wanted to keep this family together, she whispered. After your father left, I promised myself I would never let us fall apart. And now look at us. You're in another country. Claire is in a motel. The kids are suffering. And it's all my fault. I had never heard my mother admit fault. Never. In all my years, she had always been the victim, the martyr, the one who sacrificed everything for her children. To hear her say, it's all my fault, was like watching a statue crack. It's not all your fault, I said, surprising myself. Claire made her own choices. I made mine. We're all responsible for our own lives. But you did contribute. You enabled her. You made excuses for her. And you made me feel like I was wrong for wanting my own life. My mother was crying now, silent tears streaming down her cheeks. She didn't try to hide them. She just sat there, crying, while I sat on the couch and watched. I don't know how to be different, she said. This is all I know. This is how I was raised. My mother did the same thing to me. She made me responsible for my younger sister, and I never questioned it. I thought that's what love was. Sacrifice. It's not, I said. Love isn't sacrifice. Love is respect. Love is seeing someone as a whole person, not as a resource. You loved me, Mom. I know you did. But you didn't respect me. Not really. She nodded slowly, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I'm sorry. I don't know if that means anything to you, but I'm sorry. It meant something. Not everything, but something. I reached across the space between us and took her hand. It was smaller than I remembered, frilier, the hand of a woman who was getting old. I'm not ready to forgive you either, I said. But I'm willing to try. If you are. She squeezed my hand, and for the first time in years, I felt a flicker of something that wasn't resentment. It was hope. I stayed for 2 more days, long enough to have dinner with my mother, to take Mason and Lily to a park, to sit with Claire while she cried and told me about the therapy she was doing and the medication she was taking and the small, tentative steps she was making toward a better life. I didn't forgive her. I didn't forgive my mother. But I started to understand them. And understanding, I was learning, was the first step toward healing. On my last night, I sat on the front porch swing with Aunt Susan, watching the sun set over the neighborhood where I'd grown up. The sky was a riot of orange and pink, the kind of sunset that made you believe in something bigger than yourself. What are you thinking? Aunt Susan asked. I'm thinking about how strange it is, I said. I spent so many years trying to escape this place. And now that I have, I miss it. Not the drama, not the guilt. But the sky, the trees, the way the light looks in the evening. You can miss something and still know you made the right choice, Aunt Susan said. That's not contradiction. That's growth. I leaned my head on her shoulder, and we watched the sun disappear below the horizon. The next morning, I flew back to Dublin. I didn't say goodbye to my mother or Claire. I couldn't handle another emotional scene, but I left a note for each of them, tucked under their doors. To my mother, I wrote, I love you. I'll call you next week. Let's take it slow. To Claire, I wrote, keep trying. That's all any of us can do. I'll send you some information about a financial counselor I found. Use it or don't. It's up to you. On the plane, I stared out the window at the clouds and thought about the journey I'd been on. Not just the physical journey from my hometown to Dublin, but the emotional journey from doormat to woman, from guilt-ridden to self-respecting. It hadn't been easy. It still wasn't easy. There were days when I missed my family so much it felt like a physical wound. There were days when I doubted myself, wondered if I'd been too harsh, too quick to cut ties. But there were also days when I looked at my life, the work I loved, the friends I'd made, the city that had become my home, and felt a deep, abiding gratitude. I had chosen myself. And in choosing myself, I had made space for something I'd never had before, peace. 6 months later, I got a call from Claire. Not a text, not an email, but a phone call. I answered on the second ring, my heart pounding. Hey, she said. Her voice was different. Lighter. I got an apartment. A real one. 2 bedrooms near the kids' school. It's not fancy, but it's ours. That's amazing, Claire. I'm so proud of you. I couldn't have done it without the money you sent. I know you said it was for the kids, and I used it for the kids, I promise. But I just wanted to say thank you. And I wanted to ask if you would come home for Christmas. The kids are dying to see you. Anne, I'd like to see you too. I was quiet for a moment, weighing the invitation. Going home meant facing everything I'd left behind. It meant risking the peace I'd fought so hard to build. But it also meant seeing Mason and Lily, watching them open presents on Christmas morning, eating my mother's dry turkey and pretending to like it. It meant the possibility of something I'd almost given up on, a family that wasn't perfect, but was trying. I'll think about it, I said. But even if I don't come for Christmas, I'll come soon. I promise. That's enough, Claire said. That's more than enough. We hung up, and I sat in my Dublin apartment, looking out the window at the rain. The stray cat, I'd named him Finnegan, curled up on my lap and purred. Somewhere in the distance, church bells were ringing. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt something I hadn't dared to feel, happiness. Not the fragile, conditional happiness of someone who's always waiting for the other shoe to drop, but a solid, grounded happiness, the kind that comes from knowing who you are and what you deserve. I deserved this. I deserved peace. I deserved a life that was mine. And I had fought for it, tooth and nail, against the people who were supposed to love me most. It had cost me nearly everything, my relationship with my mother, my connection to my sister, the easy comfort of being part of a family. But in the end, It had given me something far more valuable, myself. The contract I'd signed that night, the one that sent me halfway across the world, had been a declaration of independence. Not from my family, but from the version of me that had believed her worth was measured by her sacrifice. I was done sacrificing. I was done shrinking. I was done being the one who always said yes. And now, as I watched the rain fall over Dublin, I realized that the story wasn't over. It would never be over. Families are messy, complicated, impossible to reduce to a single narrative. My mother would always struggle to let go of control. Claire would always have to fight her instinct to make others responsible for her. And I would always have to guard against the guilt that threatened to pull me back into old patterns. But we were trying. All of us, in our own imperfect ways, were trying. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. I picked up my phone and sent a message to Rachel. I think I'm going home for Christmas. Wish me luck. Her response came back instantly. You don't need luck. You've got this. I smiled, scratched Finnegan behind the ears, and started making plans. If you enjoy the story, please like, subscribe, and share.